webinar today. And before we get started, Stephanie, is there anything that you want to say to the group?
No, I just want to say hello.
Okay, great. So a couple of housekeeping items. So one is that we are recording this session, just so you are aware of that. Also, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we're going to try not to batch mute everybody because I'd like us to be able to have some discussion. And so we ask that if you're not speaking, to mute yourself. And so you can either do that on your phone, or if you are connected via the computer audio, you can use the little icon, the microphone icon that's next to your name in the GoToMeeting controls area to mute yourself. Okay, so Stephanie, I think that you ended up taking back controls of the screen. So if you could give those back to me. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is the first of 7 webinars that we're going to be doing over the course of 2015. And the topic for today is motivational interviewing spirit, and we're going to be covering the topics that you see on the screen on those dates. Each webinar will take place from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you should be receiving reminders from Diane prior to each monthly webinar.
I'll place this door right here.
Okay, so I do hear some background noise, so again, please mute yourself if you are not speaking to the group.
Like Grandma?
And I'm going to try to see if I can, if I can tell who is talking. Then. Okay, so a little bit about what to expect with these webinars. So we're going to start each month with a review of concepts and then do some kind of discussion and skill building practice and potentially some case review. So I will be doing a little bit of presentation at the beginning in terms of reviewing the concepts with you, but I really encourage everyone to come ready to participate and interact. This is certainly meant to be a dialogue. Okay, so let us get started then with our content for today. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go through the different components of the motivational interviewing spirit, and then we're going to listen to a recorded interaction and talk about how the spirit shows up in that interaction. So the first component of the MI spirit is partnership. So if you find that acronyms help you to remember things, one way that you can remember the MI spirit is with the acronym PACE. So the P stands for partnership, and the idea here is that motivational interviewing is a collaboration between experts. So while you bring clinical expertise, experience, and wisdom to your interactions with patients or clients, people are always going to be the experts on their own lives. They know best what they experience from day to day. And when we're talking about health behavior change, you really need that in order to come up with an approach that is going to work. If you're just coming at it from the standpoint of clinical expertise, it might get really stalled out when it comes up against the reality of someone's life.
This is a series of 7.
So our goal with motivational interviewing is for our partnership to resemble dancing rather than wrestling. So this is one of the metaphors that's commonly used to talk about how we interact with people using MI. So in a lot of professional helping relationships, whether it's in healthcare settings or counseling settings, mental health, behavioral health, we can end up in conflict with people if we don't have shared goals, if we are approaching them in a too directive fashion, if they've had a bad experience with another helping professional, maybe they're coming in ready for a wrestling match, and we want to try to change that paradigm and change the feeling of the relationship so that we are in a dance where there is at moments one person leading and another following. Maybe then we can alternate the lead so that the patient has some chance to lead, the professional has some chance to lead, but we're moving in concert with each other rather than at odds with each other. So we can think about this also in terms of the prepositions that we're using. We're not doing am I to someone or on someone, but rather for or with someone. And so this idea of doing it for someone is also very connected to another component of the MI spirit, which is compassion. That's the C in that PACE acronym, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So part of being a partner is letting go of the belief that you're supposed to have all of the answers, and this is related to the idea of resisting the writing reflex, which you may remember from training. That impulse that we have is helping professionals to set people on the right course, to try to give them the answers to solve their problems. It's really well-intentioned, but it really just doesn't function that well when it comes to health behavior change. Coming back to that notion that people are the experts on their own experience, and there's no way that we as an outsider can really have the answers for them. So we have to let go of our beliefs about that, and also stay aware of the fact that we're humans too, and that we have aspirations and convictions and our own set of beliefs about what the answers should be that we're bringing to the conversation. So part of being a good partner is maintaining that attitude of non-judgmental curiosity that is so essential to the motivational interviewing approach. So before I go on to talk about the next aspect of the spirit, I'm curious whether anybody has any questions or comments about partnership. Okay. So the next component of the MI spirit is acceptance. That's how we refer to the A in PACE. And this is about not just approaching people with an attitude of non-judgmental curiosity or unconditional positive regard, but actually letting them know that you're approaching them this way. So there's something very proactive about the acceptance that we are using in motivational interviewing. And it has these different components that you can see on the screen here in this table. And the first two are very connected to each other. So there's this notion about absolute worth, that you have as a starting point this belief in the value, inherent value and worth and wisdom of every person. And you use that as your default position or starting point of respect and assumed trustworthiness. So one way that this is described is as gullible, where no matter what your client is doing, that you kind of just maintain this conviction and this belief in them and the willingness to kind of suspend skepticism and to believe in them. And affirmation is the way in which we really let people know that we're approaching them in that way. A lot of this is about not just noticing people's strengths, going out of our way to notice people's strengths, but also going out of our way to communicate something to them about the strengths that we observe. People who are feeling stuck in some way in terms of their health behaviors or health conditions that they have are often really hard on themselves. And most people are their own biggest critic anyway. And they don't need a helping professional to remind them of all the ways in which they're stuck and not doing things to take care of themselves. They need someone to lend some hope and to help see the ways in which they have a lot of personal strength that they're bringing to their situation and that they can bring to the process of change. So another big part of motivational interviewing overall is this idea of empathy, accurate understanding, really trying to get where someone is coming from. And this is also, these last two rows in our table are also really related to each other. So part of empathy is autonomy support, acknowledging that each person has an unshakable right to self-determination, and that no matter how much we want to, we actually really cannot make people's decisions for them. We cannot move their life in a different direction. And the way we can best partner and work with people in supporting change is to first of all, really try to get where they're coming from, and to do that with an attitude of respect for their autonomy, to know that part of why we're trying to understand where they're coming from is because it's up to them to decide what they're going to do with their life. And this idea of empathy is really not the same as sympathy, where you feel pity or you feel sorry for someone. It's not the same as interpersonal warmth or friendliness or kindness. And it's also not the same as identification in terms of I've been there too, I share your experience and I get where you're coming from. It's more so about trying to understand where someone's coming from by trying to take a little bit of a walk in their shoes, where you're trying to get something about their experience without having had to be there yourself. And you can have a lot of empathy without a great deal of interpersonal warmth and still really connect to someone. And you can have a lot of interpersonal warmth but really be lacking in empathy. And then that also is not going to get you as far in terms of helping someone change behavior. Okay, so any questions or comments about acceptance before we keep going? Okay. So compassion. So compassion in motivational interviewing is really about, it comes back to that question of preposition. So this notion that we are doing MI in the service of the people that we're working with. It's for their benefit, and they're there to help them. And this is, I think, a real paradigm shifter for a lot of us, especially these days where we have all these population health metrics that we're accountable for, and we, need partnership from our patients to deliver on the expectations for outcomes, and we can really have this sense that our patients are working for us rather than the other way around. We're the ones who are working for them. So compassion is a reminder to all of us that we are there to seek and promote the welfare of the people that we are serving. And that involves getting ourselves out of the way in terms of our own personal egos and identities and ideas about how things should go. And not that we completely leave that at the door, but we have to acknowledge, especially when it comes to health behavior change, that we are not the ones who call the shots and that our ideas are less important. And we also are there to kind of accompany people's lives, this idea of being a benevolent witness, of being there to join someone in their life journey in a way to support their health, and knowing that at the same time it's really always going to be their journey and we are just accompanying them in this small way. So another one of the reasons why we focus on compassion in motivational interviewing is because these are effective methods for helping people change their thinking and their behavior, and we want to avoid manipulation. So you could use the same kind of tactics to manipulate people or to do a good sales job, and we talk about compassion to remind us that we are always doing this in service of the people that we're working with, and not for our own gain. Okay, so the final component of the MI spirit PACE is evocation. So this is the idea that you cannot install motivation. It cannot come from the outside. It's something that is already inside of people, and you can bring it out over time. So there's an assumption here that people have the wisdom and the resources within themselves to have clarity about their own goals, what's going to improve their life, what their priorities are, and how they can get there. And so our goal is to use partnership, use acceptance, use compassion to evoke from people their intrinsic motivation to change and to have a better life. And there's something very pragmatic about this as well, in that we know people are more likely to follow through on their own ideas rather than the advice of others. This is something that we can observe in human nature over the centuries and millennia, and it's not changing. People are much more moved by their own insights than by the directions of outsiders. So we're going to listen to this recording in a moment between this woman who, I'm not sure her name is shared in this video. I'm going to be playing the audio for you because playing the video gets kind of technologically complicated, but it's this woman on the left and then Steve Rolnick, who's one of the founders of motivational interviewing, and they're having an interaction relating to her diabetes management. And so before we start, though, I want to ask whether anybody has any questions or comments about PACE, the spirit of motivational interviewing, and what I have just shared about it. Okay, so what I want you to listen for as you are listening to this interaction is listen for how the spirit shows up. How do you see partnership coming through? How do you see acceptance coming through? How do you see compassion and evocation coming through in this brief interaction? And please be ready to talk about it afterwards, because otherwise this is going to get boring. There's going to be a lot of silence on the line. And I have some discussion questions that we can review together. So be thinking about the spirit and how the spirit comes out in this interview.
We've got a few minutes here this morning just to take stock of your situation with your diabetes and how you're feeling about it.
Good.
And that's probably a good place to start. How are you feeling at the moment, and how are you feeling about your diabetes?
I'm feeling comfortable that my diet's under control fairly well. There are still some improvements to be made, and they're coming. I'm not exercising as much as I should.
Right.
And I'm finding every excuse in the world to not go take a walk.
So you know what you should be doing, but it's not so easy to do it.
No, it's not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
The exercise I'm really stumbling over badly.
Okay, and that's something we'll return to in a moment. What I want to do is, first of all, just lay out for the two of us what we could be talking about today, okay? And then we'll make a decision. First of all, we could talk about your test result, which I've got the result for, okay, the A1C. We could talk about your diet. We could talk about your exercise. And I know that you're not a drinker and you're not a smoker. Or we could talk about anything else that you'd like to. Have you got a sense of, if you think about those things, which of them you'd most like to talk about? What do you find helpful?
I would find the most helpful, how do I stop finding all the excuses to not go exercise?
Right.
I get a sense that it's how I talk to myself in my own head of finding every excuse in the book not to go do it. How do I start finding every reason in the book to go do the exercise?
So you feel that it's something that's important for you to do?
Yes, I do feel it's important that I do more exercising. I know it's in my own best interest, and yet I don't do it.
Yeah. And so there's something that's stopping you.
I don't like it.
Right.
Even taking a simple walk is not particularly athletic, and yet I'm not doing a simple, easy task.
Right. So the thought of taking exercise is just not a pleasant one for you.
No, it's not.
Yeah? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah. So if you could find more pleasant thoughts about exercise, or if you could find some form of exercise that you would enjoy, you might be prepared to consider it. Although I see you sighing when I raise it.
I have thought about other things to do. I've thought of, geez, go play a game. And there don't seem to be any that appeal to me. I don't know. I'm not finding anything pleasant about that chore.
And so that must be quite frustrating for you. Knowing, yeah?
It is. It really is frustrating. And I wish I would just get beyond it and go get the exercise done. And I could have a higher quality of life.
In what way? How would it improve your life? How do you see that?
I would have more energy.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have less weight to carry around with me all the time. The A1C would come down.
Right.
I get a sense that I could eat more starches if I was burning them off with exercise.
Right. So you can see the link there between the intake of food and the exercise that you have.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've actually had insomnia for years. I understand I would sleep better if I would go get the exercise.
Right.
And yet, at the moment when it's time to go take the walk, I don't think of those things. It's, oh, what a burden it is to go take a walk, either in my neighborhood or somewhere else.
Yeah. So you can see all these good reasons why it would be a good idea. But you hit a barrier, and what you'd really like to do is to try and break through that barrier somehow.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there and ask for your reflections to say, so far, how do you see the spirit showing up in this video? What is Steve doing to convey the spirit of motivational interviewing to this client? Let's give her a name so it's easier to talk about it. So her name's Sally.
Well, he definitely partners with Sally, and this is Richard, by the way. He
Hey,
partners with her by, laying out some agenda items, but positively laying it out for her to, okay these agenda items and bring up anything else that she wants.
Right. Right. So I'm glad you picked up on that. That's a really nice method that he uses of setting the agenda, and it's really demonstrating partnership by using that menu of options, and also I think both evocation and autonomy support, where he's saying, here's the range of things we could talk about. What do you think is most important? So he's honoring her right and capacity to choose, and also finding out what her priorities are.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
This is Linda, and I think he does a great job of empathizing with her, particularly at the end when he reflects back to her what she felt, what he understood her concerns and her barriers to be. Right.
Yes, he's very accepting and very empathic about her feeling toward exercise. And I think that he does such a nice job both verbally, but then also picking up on those nonverbal cues as well. I don't know if you guys recall how at one point he said he uses a reflection to say something like, you have this very unpleasant thought narrative about this, and it sounds like if you could think about it in a more pleasant way, you might be able to consider getting some exercise. And then says, I can see that you're sighing, even at that notion. And so he's really paying attention to her, right? He's not just listening to what she's saying, but all of the other ways in which she's communicating something about her experience as well. Yeah, great observation. So what else? How else do you all see the spirit showing up here?
He didn't take any opportunity to lecture. So, for instance, she talked about the potential health benefits, and for a lot of people that would be like, yeah, you should think about that. Why aren't you doing it? But he really just went with where she was going instead of taking the conversation over, and also he didn't argue with her reasoning.
He didn't argue with her reasoning for not exercising? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's really
that,
saying
she was saying I don't know why I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? And, instead of saying well, maybe you shouldn't, instead he just kind of went with it.
Yeah, and do you recall what he said? I thought this was such a nice demonstration of compassion. Do you recall what he said after she was talking about her struggle with it?
Well, I think he said, she said, how do I find these excuses not to exercise? Why am I doing this? and he said something like, "So it's important to you."
Yeah, and he said it must be very frustrating for you.
Right.
Yeah, which I thought was so compassionate, and acknowledging, instead of kind of, like you said, jumping on the opportunity to like lecture her about it, to instead come alongside and to really be in the experience with her of not just having the struggle, but the underlying emotion that she had.
Yeah, and like she was feeling guilty in that moment, or like she was berating herself. And so like he was going along with it, but he wasn't going to go on that road with her.
Right. Yes, he wasn't about to pile on and agree with her. Absolutely. Any other observation about how the spirit has shown up already in this interaction? How do you guys see evocation showing up?
Could that be when he says, you know, he identifies with her when she identifies the positives of exercise, the higher quality of life, I could eat more starches, things like that. He says, well, you see the benefits and the barriers in this.
Right. So he's empathic about it, and when he's really listening for any opportunity to evoke that arises in the conversation. So the reason she starts saying all of those things about the details of, you know, I have insomnia, I could eat more starch, I would feel better, I would carry less weight around. The reason she ends up saying all those things is because she kind of mentioned something about how her quality of life would be better if she exercised more. And so he followed up with an open question, basically asking her, tell me more about that. How would your life be better if you were to get more exercise? And then we were able to hear all of those things from her about how exercise would improve her health and her quality of life. And then he is, as you say, able to be empathic and respond to that, all of those things. Okay, so any other comments before we continue watching?
Oh, okay. So actually, is it the station?
Background. I'm gonna mute
Munch
the person.
I have to look into that a little bit more. Your conversation.
Okay, so I'm not. Sorry, just a moment. Okay, so let's go back to our video. I'm going to resume.
That's exactly where I'm at.
Yeah. And I wonder what you think might be just the first small step that could help you through that barrier. Do you see what I'm saying? Because sometimes people think about exercise and it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger thing in their mind, and then actually the barrier gets bigger. And I'm wondering if there's some way we can just lower the barrier for you so that there's a small step that you could take. I'm not sure what it is.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm not seeing any way through.
Yeah.
Other than I think it's how I think about it.
Right.
If I would quit seeing it as such a huge burden, it wouldn't be such a huge burden.
Right.
Is that it?
Well, it certainly sounds like it for you, that if you could not be saying those things to yourself, the barrier would feel a bit better. It's what makes sense to you that matters here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it something to the effect of, I hear myself thinking this is such a horrible chore, and then I go, oh, find another way to think about this.
Yep. It sounds like that's quite a trap for you in a way, isn't it? The way you think about it. And can you think of a way, of a more positive way of looking at it that will take you out of that trap? What could you say to yourself?
I could tell myself it's not nearly that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I could just tell myself, instead of sitting here thinking about it, why don't you go take the walk and get it done and over with?
Mm. And what would that walk be like for you? Can you think of a manageable walk? that you could immediately go and do?
Yes. Most of this happens at home.
Yes.
I could simply go outside and take the walk. No, I don't like walking in windstorms. I don't want to be out in the rain.
Exactly.
At that point, I can, maybe I can go somewhere indoors that has a walking track. And I don't really know where that is yet.
Right. So you're thinking that might be a possibility. And you know, your A1C level's a little bit raised this morning. And let me just see if I can summarize what we've said today and see what you make of this, okay? Your A1C is a little bit raised. You're aware that it's important to watch your diet.
Yes.
Yep, and you've been trying to do something about that. But of all the subjects we could talk about, it's exercise where you feel you could make the most progress.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're aware of the benefits of that.
Yes.
Yeah. For your health, for sleeping, and just for feeling better about yourself generally. You're aware of that. It's breaking through a barrier in which your negative thinking is translated into something that's more positive, and you do some form of manageable exercise.
Yes.
You haven't quite worked out what it is yet.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So you more or less decided you want to do it, but you're just not quite sure what it is yet. Have I got you?
Yes.
Yeah.
You've got it perfect.
Yeah. And is there anything else about your diabetes that you'd like to talk about? Anything at all? We've got just a couple of minutes left.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there again and ask you guys the same question. In this segment of the interview, how do you see the spirit coming through?
Well, he does a great job of partnering with her to elicit her own ideas about what will work for her, not what he thinks she should do, but what ideas that she could actually live with and accomplish.
Right. Absolutely. And that is such a nice way of partnering, of evoking, and of supporting autonomy. Absolutely.
I liked what he said about what she can say to help herself minimize the barriers.
Right. So I thought this was so artful, the way that he did that. So this was kind of right at the beginning of this segment, after I started playing the interaction again, where he asks her about what small steps she could take. He kind of normalizes the fact that a lot of people, when they think about exercise, make it into this big thing. There's this huge barrier, and he says, what can we do to lower this barrier? And that is such a nice message of partnership. He's using this we language. And this is also one of the ways in which motivational interviewing is a guiding, directive approach. He is not willing to get stuck with her in her negative thinking about exercise, and using the spirit of motivational interviewing, using partnership, using compassion, acceptance, and evocation, he is able to help her reframe this and to begin to think about it differently. And he kind of tests the waters to see if she's willing to get unstuck from this negative thinking. And he presents that as an option, and then he follows up by saying, it's what makes sense to you that matters here. And so in that way, he is able to be a guide and to be directive and say, let's get you out of this negative thinking, but does it in such a way that she feels that he completely understands her, that he's totally on her team, and that he is not pushing her around. So what else? What does he follow that with?
I think one of the things that stood out to me as well is how much autonomy she has in this interaction with him, and he really is encouraging that throughout.
Yes, absolutely. And so can you say a little bit more about how you see that happening? What is it that he's doing to support her autonomy?
Well, he's definitely encouraging her to come up with her own ideas about what's going to work and be successful for her, rather than imposing his own ideas or thoughts or even suggestions. He's really trying to, walk alongside of her and help her to pull her own ideas together and in ways that are doable, workable for her.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you can really see him. He's not installing motivation or ideas about change. He's drawing them out from her.
Yes.
And in that way, I think also we can see how the different components of the MI spirit really intersect with each other so much that I think you were describing what he was doing as autonomy support. She has so much autonomy in this interview, but we could also describe that as partnership. We could also describe it as acceptance, and we could also describe it as evocation. So even though we have these discrete words that we use to talk about the different components of the MI spirit, in a lot of ways they are kind of layered on top of each other, and that a lot of our communication behaviors and skills and the way that we conduct an interview are conveying all of the elements of the spirit at the same time. Any other comments about how the spirit shows up in this interaction? Does anybody have a sense of how long this interview has been? There's a timer running on the screen, so I can tell you they've been talking for 8 minutes. So not a particularly long conversation. It does go on for another minute and a half or so, and she just mentions that she wants to get some recipes on healthy cooking, and she's going to get them from like the University Extension Center or something, and they kind of wrap things up. There's not that much more that happens, so I'm not going to play it. But the point is that in an 8-minute interaction, he is able to really help her begin to change her thinking about exercise and to connect it to her other health goals. He brings it back in that summary at the end there to the test results relating to her elevated A1C. He connects it to the other ways in which she's managing her diabetes through her diet, and he connects it back to the other benefits of exercise that she has described in the conversation. So if you think back to the different skills of motivational interviewing that we talked about in training, ORS, which skill do you see him using at the end there?
He's using a lot of reflection and summarizing, to. I don't even know that I'd say he's using affirmation, although I do think he's definitely being careful to emphasize the positive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know that we've really seen a lot of affirmation in this interview, but yeah, he's doing a lot of reflecting, and then he does that nice summary at the end and pulls all the pieces together. And one of the ways in which people talk about summarizing is that a good summary is kind of collecting the flowers of change talk along the way and then handing them back to the client in a bouquet. And I think that is a really good example of that. There's been a lot of sustained talk in this interview where she talks a fair amount about the ways in which she doesn't like exercising and she's stuck and she doesn't want to do it. But what he summarizes in that summary there is the reasons for change and the reasons why she might want to break through this barrier of negative thinking. And he says, you're not exactly sure how you're going to do it yet, but it's really important to you to do that. And so this really nice bouquet of change talk. Okay, so let's keep going with our discussion. So we already talked about that. So what I want to ask you guys now are these questions. How have you been incorporating MI Spirit into your practice? Can you think of any missed opportunities recently where interacting with someone and you really indulged in the writing reflex or noticed yourself kind of giving a lot of advice or doing something that was not in alignment with MI Spirit? And are there particular situations where it's harder to keep the spirit at the table? And then what helps you connect with compassion so that you can kind of bring yourself back to the spirit? So I'm going to just put all these discussion questions out there, and you can answer any of them that you feel inclined to share your thoughts on. And like I said, I think it would be great to hear about both what you're observing in terms of your experience of trying to practice, and then also what helps you feel inspired and to want to connect with compassion and to connect with spirit in your interactions with your patients.
I know for myself, incorporating the MI Spirit is I feel like I'm pretty good at using compassion, and I really try to use the open-ended questions. And I think at times I can be good about evoking the change talk. Let's see. In terms of missed opportunities, there are many. That I don't even need to go into those in depth. And situations that I find it harder to. One thing that was notable about this lady is that she really seems to be at a pretty self-reflective stage of change, and already have done a lot of her own. I don't know if she's had sessions before or whatever, but she's got a good idea of what the problems are and what the benefits are, and now it's going to be just helping her really take that first small step. And yeah, so when I have someone on the phone that is just they just want it handed to them, that's where it's really difficult for me. When somebody just wants, they don't want to invest in their own health, and that's when, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, is the yeah buts, you know, and just want it handed to them on a silver platter a lot of times. So that's when it's more difficult for me.
Yeah, where there's more evoking, it sounds like, that needs to be done, or where when you're trying to evoke and the person is not, doesn't feel like they're responding in kind by contributing their ideas about change.
Correct.
Yeah, so what it sounds like a little bit in terms of what you're describing is people who are really ambivalent, where there's a lot of sustained talk. There's a lot of yeah, but they're really just not seeming that motivated to make the change that you're discussing. Would you say that's accurate?
That's correct.
So does anybody have any thoughts about how to keep the spirit at the table in that kind of situation?
I think this is a really difficult one that I find, you know, accepting ambivalence or that kind of thing, I find that one of the hardest skills. In our clinic, there's some situations where we have clients who need to make behavior changes before they can move on to certain medical treatment. That they like, need to quit smoking or need to lose weight before they can get a certain treatment. And so the motivation is external rather than internal. And you can't just like dangle that over their heads. You can't just be like, well, remember, you need to do this. I'm sorry, I don't actually have a lot of feedback because I have to say this is an area of a lot of concern for me too, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that as well.
This is Nancy. One of the things that I do use when I get that is take out the, that I made a copy of the slide that you had of the motivation mountain. And I love that, and I use it a lot when I get resistance or ambivalence, because I just kind of, I work with teenagers mostly, so I'll just kind of pick that out and show them, kind of do a 30-second explanation of what it is, or 10-second explanation, and then just say, so it sounds like, or this is where you are, or I might even say, where do you think you are on this mountain? How motivated are you to change? Where do you place yourself? And depending on the kid, sometimes I have a couple of kids who it's like pulling teeth sometimes. So sometimes I say to them, it sounds like this is where you are. What do you think? But if I can, I'll rephrase it the other way and let them show me. And then that sometimes can get them unstuck again, at least telling me why, why they're there, and thinking about then the baby steps of how do they get